For the past year or so, we basically treated artificial intelligence like a passenger on a journey where we're still doing all the actual driving. We ask a question, we get an answer, we ask another question, we're steering. But right now, we are crossing a major threshold. We are literally handing over the keys. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the awakening of autonomous agents. It's a fundamental shift that's going to totally redefine how we work, how we scale our judgment, and honestly, what human intelligence is actually worth in the marketplace.
Look, most of us are still stuck in that chatbot mindset. A chatbot answers questions, right? It predicts the next word based on probabilities. Working with a chatbot is exactly like sitting next to a student driver. You've got to guide them, correct them, and just stay incredibly alert at every single intersection. The second you stop talking, the chatbot stops working. But an agent completes goals. It actually figures out its next move. When you use an agent, you set the destination, you hand over those keys, and you sit in the back seat. It handles the route, the traffic, and all those step-by-step decisions required to reach the final destination.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. If we're moving past chatbots, how do you actually know which parts of your workflow should be handed over to an agent? Well, enter the ARR Framework. Think of this as the absolute crucial dividing line. If a task doesn't fit these three letters, it should stay as a prompt, or frankly, just stay with a human. But if it does fit, you're looking at the perfect candidate for true automation. Let's break this down.
The A stands for autonomous. Now, this means the task can run from start to finish without you needing to step in to provide live judgment or supervision. True agency begins only when we can confidently step away from the keyboard entirely and let the system operate in the background. If a task constantly requires your delicate personal touch halfway through, it's just not ready for an agent. So the first R is recurring. Building an agent is an investment in building a system. You wouldn't hire a full-time employee to do a task that only happens once a year, right? Same logic applies here. One-off questions or those rare, wild creative brainstorms are perfect for chatbots and prompts. But the predictable, repetitive burdens, like those data pulls you do every single Monday morning or the invoices you process every Friday, those recurring loops are where autonomous agents absolutely thrive. And the final R is reviewable. You've got to think of this as your ultimate safety net. A task must have a final result that can be clearly and objectively evaluated. Can you look at the output and instantly know if it's correct or incorrect? Because without a clear metric for success, handing over autonomy to a machine literally just breeds chaos. You absolutely have to know what a successful outcome looks like before you unleash an agent to go pursue it.
So what is actually happening under the hood here? It's really not just one massive brain guessing at a solution. A single agent is actually 4 invisible employees acting together as one complete intelligence. When you assign a goal, you're actually dispatching an analyst, a planner, an operator, and an auditor. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they collaborate. Just imagine giving an agent the task of reviewing hundreds of customer support tickets while you sleep. First, the analyst examines all that raw data to find the recurring complaints. Then, the planner steps in to decide what actually matters most and structures a one-page leadership brief. Next, the operator does the heavy lifting, drafting the actual summary. And finally, the auditor checks the whole thing for weak logic or missing context before ever sending it to your inbox. You didn't just automate a task, you orchestrated an entire invisible department.
Let's look at how this builds into real-world adaptability, because it's fascinating. Back in the 1970s, Air Force Colonel John Boyd studied this really intriguing puzzle from the Korean War. American pilots in their F-86 jets kept defeating technically superior Soviet MiGs. The MiGs were faster, they climbed higher. On paper, they absolutely should have won. But Boyd found the difference. American pilots could see more from their cockpits, and because they had that visibility, they could adapt faster to changing conditions. Adaptability defeats rigid superiority every single time.
Boyd codified this advantage into something he called the OODA Loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The pilot who cycles through this loop the fastest, they win the dogfight. Now, this military concept is the precise mechanism that allows an AI agent to basically think and adapt when its environment inevitably changes. It doesn't just blindly execute a script like old software. No, it observes its surroundings, it orients itself to new data, decides on a new path, and then it acts. To really see this in action, just contrast traditional automation with an agent. Let's say you have an automated workflow set up to buy groceries every Friday. Well, a traditional workflow crashes immediately if your usual brand of chicken is out of stock. It's designed to be obedient, not flexible. But an agent running an OODA loop, it notices the failure. It observes the missing item, orients by checking your calendar, sees that you actually have 6 friends coming over for a dinner party, decides on an appropriate substitute, and completely rebuilds the order autonomously. But this incredible autonomy comes with a pretty stark warning. Agents are a mirror of intent. They aren't magic. They are multipliers. If you give an agent a vague goal or just sloppy directions, it doesn't magically fix your bad thinking. It formalizes it. It amplifies your flaws, effectively driving the car straight into a tree, only it does so way faster and with much more confidence than you ever could. The reality is, most AI problems are actually just human problems in disguise. This means human oversight is absolutely vital. Before you even think about building an agent, you must pass the GPS check, and that starts with the goal. You have to define your ultimate goal in a single, unambiguous sentence. If your goal is even a little fuzzy to you, it's going to be disastrously misinterpreted by the system. The second checkpoint is proof. I want you to ask yourself right now, how will you prove the output is actually good? How will you know if the agent actually got it right? If you cannot clearly articulate what a successful outcome looks like, you simply cannot build an agent to achieve it. Vague instructions don't create flexibility, they create formalized automated messes. And the final checkpoint is steps. Can you describe every single critical step in the process clearly, without any hand-waving? You can't just tell an agent to figure it out. You have to understand the logic of the work deeply enough to actually map it out. Because if you can't explain the necessary steps, neither can the AI. So, the crucial point is, compare a vague command like, hey, summarize my emails every morning, with a highly precise one like, read at 7 a.m., categorize by urgency, draft replies, and flag my top 5 clients. That gap between those two statements, that is exactly where the mess lives. Narrow, precise ownership always beats broad, sloppy commands. The absolute winners in this new era are going to be obsessively narrow.
And that leads us to the profound macroeconomic shift happening right beneath our feet. We call it the Great Decoupling. For almost all of modern history, your income, your value to a company, it was directly tied to the hours you worked. You traded your time and your physical output for money. Autonomous agents are permanently breaking that link. The system will now do the work. We are entering an era of infinite output. Think about it. We've reached a point where generating content, writing code, pulling massive amounts of data, drafting analysis, it costs almost $0 and 0 seconds. And when the production of information becomes completely frictionless and infinite like that, the sheer volume of output ceases to be a competitive advantage. It just doesn't matter anymore.
Which brings us to this fascinating philosophical reality. Taste becomes scarce. When machine intelligence is incredibly cheap and output is practically infinite, human judgment becomes the most expensive asset on Earth. Knowing what good looks like, defining precise standards, spotting bad work, and knowing exactly when to trust an agent, that critical thinking is what you will be paid for moving forward. You're no longer scaling your time, you are scaling your taste. We are rapidly moving into a world with more agents than human beings. The repetitive work? It's basically already handled. So, when intelligence becomes cheap, what is the price of your judgment? It's time to stop trying to work harder and start scaling your taste.